Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Welcome to the Sudds-R-Us podcast, hosted by Irene and Ben Sudderth Jr.
Greetings.
We just give thanks to God once again to be able to come before you on our second season, episode 9, and we continue to share with you the concepts of the circle of love, where we focus on God, marriage, family, and life. Now on this focus of life, we're in a new month of March. This is Women's Month, so we want to give you a theme on women of distinction. And we're going to talk about a couple of women today. You can probably see the photos behind us, so we're going to highlight them. But before we get into our women topics, just let me shout out our son, Mr. Podcaster himself, Ben Sudderth III. And we're featured on his podcast, along with many others, with topics around sports and music, life, comedy, social culture, and relationships. We are all distributed under the arc of BS3 Radio. And we're just so thankful for that and so proud of him. You can follow the BS3 Radio on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Now, if you're interested, we're soliciting those who are interested in joining BS3 Radio or starting your podcast, and maybe you're not sure how to start or where to start. Please don't hesitate to contact BS3 Radio. You can contact him on bs3coaching.square.site. That's bs3coaching.square.site. Right. And we would love for you, as you're watching us, that you would follow us with likes and shares and comments and even subscribe. We would love for you to subscribe. We're growing, and we thank you for tuning in. And because you can review us on social media and podcast platforms, you can review us on Facebook, which is Sudds-R-Us Podcast, and that's Sudds with capital S and capital R, dash capital R, dash capital U, Sudds-R-Us Podcast. You can also find us on Instagram with Sudds, these are lowercase, Sudds_R_S Podcast. You can find us on Twitter, which is Sudds, iSudds. Instead of an S, it's iSudds with a Z at the end, all lowercase. And you can find us on iHeartRadio. You can find us on Amazon Podcasts and on Apple Podcasts and YouTube. Yes. And we're always interested in hearing from you. So if you have any questions or any possible topics, please don't hesitate to email us at Sudds-R-Us@gmail.com. Sudds-R-Us@gmail.com. So we're excited today because we're looking at women of distinction. And our first topic is Elizabeth Bessie Coleman. Right. And she's behind us, behind my, I guess it would be my left shoulder. And we're just thankful that we're able to highlight these beautiful women on today. Yes. Now, we were blessed, my wife and I, because we lived in the San Francisco, Oakland Bay Area for 35 years. And we actually worked in Oakland for 15 and 25 years, respectively, as pastor and first lady of Glad Tidings Community Church. And our church is on East 12th Street, which is only a block down from East 14th, which is now called International Boulevard. Right. Which is a very historical boulevard or street when it comes to African-American businesses, and as well as when it comes to Black events. And unfortunately, when it comes to criminal activity, if you know what I mean, on East 14th for International Boulevard. Wow. But it's right across, the church was right across the freeway from 880 and also the BART Rail, which is the Bay Area Rapid Transit, Bay Area Rapid Transit, also from the actual Bay. So my wife, who was an executive assistant for the Port of Oakland, and her office was in Jack London Square. Now, Jack London Square is a very historical shopping area. And she was blessed because it was right at the foot of Broadway in downtown Oakland. Now, not only was it a beautiful particular location because of her office, she had a view of San Francisco, But it was also, because it was at the end of Broadway in Oakland, it was also the epic center of the Black Lives Matter protest area. So the protesters was march in that area. And because the church was only a few minutes from the Port of Oakland where she worked, sometimes we would commute together. Mm-hmm. So it was a blessing for us to be able to commute together because we only worked a few minutes from one another. Right. And, you know, I love to be around my distinctive woman as much as we could. So when that Black Lives Matter movement was going on and the protesters, we had a warning that we needed to get out of town because we had to go across the bridge to get home. So we would leave earlier. Leave early. But the Port of Oakland not only owned the shipyards. Now, this is where they imported and exported merchandise from all over the world. Right. They also owned, and she was right, her office was right next to the shipyard. They also owned and operated Oakland International Airport. That's right. As well. And that was like 15 minutes from the church. That's the revenue right there. And right across the, that's right, that's the revenue. And right across the freeway from the Oakland International Airport was the Alameda County Arena and Oracle Arena, Alameda County Coliseum. Mm-hmm. That's where the A's and the Warriors and the Raiders played before the Warriors moved to San Francisco. Right. And before the Raiders moved to Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. So we were blessed because we were privy, by the grace of God, to information that a lot of other people were not aware of. And we also had the privilege of attending sporting events and different dedication ceremonies. And we were also preferred, and we like to fly out of Oakland. Mm-hmm. And the reason, because instead of going to San Francisco, which you have to go across the bridge, and there was a lot of traffic and a bigger airport. Well, the Oakland airport was a medium-sized airport. It was easy to maneuver around. And also because we could park for free, because Irene, my woman of distinction, had all the connections because she was an employee at the Port of Oakland. So we was able to support the city of Oakland as well. For instance, January 29th, 2014, the Port of Oakland and the city of Oakland officially announced the formal dedication of Bessie Coleman Drive at the Oakland International Airport, or OAK. Right. The stretch of the roadway named for the first female African-American and Native American international aviator, Elizabeth Bessie Coleman, and included a portion of the airport drive between Doolittle Drive and Neil Armstrong Way. Now, Congresswoman Barbara Lee and Oakland Mayor Jean Quan and Oakland Vice Mayor Larry Reed joined the Port of Oakland Director of Aviation's Deborah Ali Flint and Tuskegee Airmen Local Chapter President David Cunningham and the Bay Area Black Pilots Association Representative Dr. Leslie Stratford at a news conference at the Oakland Aviation Museum located at the Oakland International Airport, the historical North Field. So on February 14th, 2014, which is a Friday, it's mentioned that we have formally dedicated a portion of the airport roadway in Bessie's honor, much as her legacy has paved the way for opportunities to take flight, said Port of Oakland Aviator Director Deborah Ali Flint. Bessie Coleman is not only deserving of her prominent place in history, but her unwavering tenacity and boundaries-busting spirit reflect some of the same attributes we strive to employ at Oakland International Airport today. Part of Coleman's aviation career brought her to Oakland, California in 1923, when she landed a job publicizing the Coast Tire and Rubber Company of Oakland and soon began appearing in the company's new newspaper ads. The roadway name changed its reflection on a large 4-foot-high street sign which greets visitors entering the Oakland International Airport roadway loop. The Oakland Port Board of Commissions passed an ordinance in September 2007 to rename a portion of the airport drive to Bessie Coleman Drive. However, a formal designation of the roadway was delayed, and it was delayed for several reasons for several years due to major airport-related construction projects, including the new air traffic control building, including a new BART connector to the OAK, which is the Bay Area Rapid Transit, to OAK, which is Oakland International Airport, and terminal renovations. So Elizabeth Bessie Coleman, she was born January 26, 1892, wow. And look at this, in Atlanta, Texas. I didn't say Atlanta, Georgia. In Atlanta, Texas. She was the 10th of 13 children of George Coleman, whose grandparents were Cherokee, and Susan Coleman, who was an African American. Like I mentioned last week, a lot of us have Native American blood running through our veins. When Coleman was 2 years old, her family moved to Waxahachie, Texas, where they lived as sharecroppers. Now, Waxahachie has a history of segregation and racism that came into the national spotlight in 2020. I'm just talking about last year. It came into the national spotlight in 2020. Now listen to this. When a county judge, Todd Little, banished the county's only elected African-American, Constable Curtis Polk Jr., to the basement of the courthouse and forced him to office under a stairwell next to a segregated era sign that read Negroes. Now facing national spotlight, Little, a Republican, did an about face, and he agreed to move Polk, a Democrat, and to remove the sign. He is now facing criminal charges for vandalism. Wow. Bessie Coleman, she worked in the cotton fields at the young age and began attending school in Waxahachie at the age of 6. Now she walks 4 miles each day to a one-room segregated school, and she loved to read, and she was establishing herself as an outstanding math student, and she completed her elementary education in that school. In 1901, George Coleman left his family. And when he left Bessie with he was 9 years old, and he returned to Oklahoma, or Indian Territory, which was considered evolving land area set aside by the United States government for the relocation of Native Americans who held aboriginal title to their land as sovereign independent state. In general, the tribe ceded land they occupied in exchange for land grants in 1803. So he left his family, supposedly for better opportunities, but his wife and children did not follow. Wow. So at age 12, Bessie was accepted into the Missionary Baptist Church School on scholarship. And when she turned 18, she took her savings and enrolled into Oklahoma Colored Agriculture and Normal University in Langston, Oklahoma, which is now Langston University. But she completed only one term before her money ran out and she had to return home. So at the age of 23, Bessie Coleman moved to Chicago, Illinois, where she lived with her brothers in Chicago. And watch this now, she worked as a manicurist at the White Sox barbershop. There she heard stories of flying during wartime from pilots returning home from World War I. So she took a second job at Chili Parlor to save money in hopes of becoming a pilot. American flight schools of that time admitted neither women nor black people. So Robert S. Albert, the founder of the publisher of the Chicago Defender in 1905, encouraged her to study abroad. Abbott published the Defender, and he publicized Coleman's quest in his newspaper, and she received financial sponsorship from banker Jesse Pinga. Now, Jesse Pinga, who was a prominent African-American businessman who founded the first private-owned African-American bank in Chicago.
Whoa,
so he was a notable pioneer of African-American business achievements in the early 20th century. So the Chicago Defender, who was owned by Abbott, who was an African-American newspaper owner and publisher, he considered far as this particular opportunity for her. And once he considered it, most important African-American newspaper in that particular area. Now listen to this. This is very interesting. Abbott's newspaper, which supported Bessie Coleman, he also campaigned against Jim Crow in the era of violence. And he urged Black people in the American South to come north, which became the Great Migration. Wow. Now, Abbott worked out an information distribution center or system with the Pullman Porters, who in secret, sometimes against Southern state laws, took the paper by rail beyond Chicago, and they distributed it to African-American readers in the Southern United States, which gave them information that they would no other way receive because of this publication. Now, Bessie Coleman, she developed an early interest in flying, but African Americans, Native Americans, and even women had no flight training opportunities in the United States. So she saved and obtained sponsorship, like I mentioned earlier, from Abbott because of the newspaper, the Defender, the Chicago Defender, and also from the banker, Binga, and she went to France for flight school. She then became a high-profile pilot in notoriously dangerous air shows in the United States. She was popularly known as Queen Bess, Brave Bessie, and she hoped to start a school for African-American flyers. Now, on June 15th, 1921, she became the first African-American to earn an international aviation license. She also became the first American of any gender or any ethnicity to do so. She earned her pilot license from the Federation of Aeronautique and internationally, which is in France. Now, Queen Bess, as she was known, was highly popular. She drew fans from all over for the next 5 years. She was invited to important events and often interviewed by newspapers. She was admired by both Blacks and whites, and she primarily flew the Curtiss JN-4 Jenny biplane and other aircraft that had been Army surplus aircraft that was left over from the war. She made her first appearance in an American air show in September the 3rd, 1922, at an event honoring veterans of the all-Black 369th Infantry Regiment of World War I, formerly known as the 15th New York National Guard Regiment, and commonly referred to as the Harlem Hellfighters, or Men of Bronx, or the Black Rattlers. The air show was held at Curtis Field on Langston Island near New York City, and was sponsored by her friend, the publisher and owner of the Chicago Defender newspaper. And the show billed Coleman as the world's greatest woman flyer and featured aerial displays by 8 other American ace pilots and a jump by Black parachutist Hubert Julian. The thrill of stunt flying and the admiration of the cheering crowds were only part of Bessie Coleman's dream. Coleman, she never lost sight of her childhood vow to one day amount to something. As a professional aviator, Coleman often would be criticized by the press for her opportunistic nature and her flamboyant style she brought to her exhibition flying. I believe it was because she was an intelligent, confident, talented, and proud, beautiful Black woman.
Yes.
She also quickly gained a reputation as a skilled and daring pilot who would stop at nothing to complete a difficult stunt. She demonstrated daredevil maneuvers, which unfortunately was probably to the end to her detriment. But what she did, she included figure eights and loop-de-loops.
Come on,
and
Bessie.
she went near to the dips, to the lower, to the excited crowds. And in Los Angeles, unfortunately, she broke a leg and 3 ribs when her plane stalled and crashed on February 22nd, 1923. She was committed to promoting aviation and combating racism. Coleman spoke to artisans all across the country about the pursuit of aviation and goals of African Americans. She was absolutely refused to participate in aviation events that prohibited the attendance of African Americans. Bessie Coleman. I have a lot more, but let me move on. She also, Bessie Coleman, in the area of development in segregated African American communities, she was able to be promoted, and she was also able to be enlisted as one of the best navigators in America. Also, through the media, she got this opportunity to be an actual actor, and she was asked to be in this particular show. And the show was produced by the African American seminal film called The Shadow and Sunshine. But when she got on the particular show, and when she went on the set, and the first scene, they wanted her to dress up in shabby clothes and wear and carry a stick and have a pack on her back. She refused. She walked off the studio stage. She said she refused to be stereotyped.
I know that's right.
And be perpetuated in a derogatory image that most whites had for Blacks back then. She refused to live that type of image. So in 1926, April the 30th, Coleman was in Jacksonville, Florida. She had recently purchased a Curtis JN4 Jenny in Dallas. Her mechanic and publicist agent, 24-year-old Women D. Wills, flew the plane from Dallas in preparation for an air show and had to make 3 forced landings along the way because the plane had been poorly maintained. Upon learning this, Coleman's family and friends considered her and asked her not to fly the aircraft.
Wow.
They implored her not to fly the aircraft, but she refused because, as she would say, the old motto, the show must go on. And because of that, like I mentioned before, it was to her detriment. And after takeoff, Willis was flying the plane, and Coleman was in the other seat, and she didn't put on her seat belt because she wanted to view the area, because she was planning on doing a parachute jump during the air show. And so when she leaned over the cockpit to see the terrain, about 10 minutes in the flight, the plane unexpectedly went into a dive. Then it spun out of control at 3,000 feet above the ground. Bessie Coleman was thrown out of the plane at 2,000 feet. And she died instantly when she hit the ground. William Wills was unable to regain control of the plane, and it plummeted to the ground, and Wills died upon impact. The plane exploded, burst into flames, and although the wreckage of the plane was badly burned, it was later discovered that a wrench used to service the plane engine was jammed in the controls.
Wow.
Coleman was 34 years old. I don't have any evidence of this, my brothers and sisters, but this accident seems suspicious to me because of the criticism she received and the jealousy of the white men in that industry. The hatred and the racism of a successful, beautiful Black woman in that day could have resulted in this so-called accident. The funeral services were held in Florida, and then her body was sent back to Chicago. While there was little media in most media areas, but the news of her death was widely carried in the African American press. 10,000 mourners attended her ceremony in Chicago, which was led by civil rights activist Ida B. Wells, who was the co-founder of the NAACP. Bessie Coleman taught us to pursue our dreams against all odds, said Oakland Mayor Gene Quan. And this brings to my mind a scripture that we share with our grandbabies every morning when we do homeschooling. And that's Philippians 4:13. It says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Everyone who travels along that Bessie Coleman Drive will be reminded of this remarkable, passionate, and inspirational woman, said Oakland Vice Mayor Larry Reed. Special thanks to the Port of Oakland, and the City of Oakland. We're so proud that Bessie Coleman legacy of the African Americans, women pilots, and the first African American to hold an international pilot license will have a permanent home in Oakland, said Congresswoman Barbara Lee. Bessie Coleman, she was a trailblazer, an inspiration, and the finest example of a remarkable contribution made by women of color in our nation's history. Here's a few honors as I close. A public library in Chicago was named in Coleman's honor, as roads at O'Hara International Airport in Chicago, Tampa International Airport in Florida, Germany's Frankfurt International Airport. A memorial plaque has been placed by the Chicago Cultural Center at her location at her former home. And also, whenever African-American aviators fly over the cemetery where she was buried in Lincoln Cemetery, they will throw flowers in her honor. And a roundabout led in Nice Airport in south of France was named in her honor. Bessie Coleman Middle School in Center Hill, Texas is named for her. Bessie Coleman Boulevard in Waxahachie, Texas, where she lived, was named in her honor. Atlanta, Texas has a regional history museum which proudly displays her downscale reproduction of a version of Bessie Coleman yellow biplane. U.S. Postal Service issued a 32-cent stamp honoring Coleman in 1995. The Bessie Coleman commemorative in the 18th in the U.S. Postal Service Black History Series. In 2001, Coleman was introduced to the National Women's Hall of Fame. And in 2006, she was inducted into the National Aviation Hall of Fame. Elizabeth Bessie Coleman.
Wow. What a fascinating story about the shero and queen, Bessie Coleman. We salute Bessie. I'm sure you see the picture behind us and also her goggles. If I slide over a little bit, you see Bessie's goggles back there. We want to take a moment, just a quick moment. Thank you, Al, for tuning in. Thank you, Charcina. We appreciate you tuning in, and all the others that may tune in at a later time. We appreciate your support. I'm going to move forward with the Queen and Dr. Mae Jemison. You can see her over my shoulder, my right shoulder. Did you know that there were 16 African Americans that went into space?
Wow.
And out of those 16, there were 4 African American women. I did not know that. This research this week has truly blown my mind. But as we continue to recognize Women's History Month, we are going to highlight the astronaut and queen, Dr. Mae Jemison, who was born on October 17th, 1956 in Alabama, but she was raised in Chi-Town in Chicago. She is the youngest child of Charlie Jemison, who was a roofer and a carpenter, and her mother, Dorothy Jemison, was an elementary school teacher. Now, Mae grew up early on watching the earliest space mission on TV. And when she noticed that the crew were all white men, she thought to herself, I thought that was one of the dumbest things in the world, because I used to worry. And she said, yes, believe it or not, as a little girl, I would worry that aliens would get the wrong idea about humanity from looking at the all white, all male crew at the earliest space missions. Can you imagine this young girl being interviewed by the National Library of Medicine? Literally asked the question, what would aliens think of humans? You know, like, these are the only humans? Now, she had deep thoughts at such a young age. And then look, in 1992, at the age of 29, she helped set the cosmic record straight about humanity and brought some chocolate to the moon. When Space Shuttle Endeavour launched on its mission, during which she orbited the Earth for nearly 8 days from September 12th to September 20th in 1992. Now, this interstellar culture shock isn't the sort of thing an average 8-year-old worries about, but Jemison was not an average child.
That's right.
Dr. Jemison and her uncle would look up at the stars, and he would tell her that there were really suns and that they were just small because they were so many miles away. So she always assumed that she was supposed to be able to understand these things. So Dr. Jemison had always known that she wanted to be a scientist. And in kindergarten, her kindergarten teacher asked her, well, it's the whole class, I'm sure, you know, what do you want to be when you grow up? And she immediately responded that she wanted to be a scientist. And then this teacher mentioned to her, don't you want to be a nurse? And Dr. Jemison, not doctor at that time, but she put her hand on her hip and said, no, I want to be a scientist.
That's right.
You know, that is so common. And our son experienced that same thing in elementary school. You know, when you have teachers that try to discourage your child from what they are pursuing and are passionate about. So our son's teacher, I got to tell this testimony, even though it was so many years ago, our son is almost 40 years old, and I will never, ever forget this. She would tell our son that you are just so slow in your learning process and you're not going to amount to much. So because of her comment, you know, it just made my son pursue and press even harder. And so every year following that, our son, BS3 Sports, Benjamin Franklin Sudderth III, government name, that's right. He ended up being an A student every single year following that comment that this Black teacher, may I add, made to him. And I told him when he finished high school, we took a ride back to that school where she was still a teacher. And I personally had him come up to her and say, do you remember me? You know, and gave his history of the academic achievements that he had made and that he was going to, in a few months, going to Morehouse College. And and then after he said his piece, because I wanted him to stand tall.
That's right.
And I didn't need to make that comment for him, but I made her aware in so many words that you don't know the impact that words can make on young men, but our son will be somebody.
That's right.
And just like our son, you know, he was a successful Black man, and so was Dr. Mae Jemison. She was not deterred by this teacher, and she didn't expect to be an astronaut, but that's what she wanted to do. You know, she did pursue science, and she did actually take that to the moon. But she began studying at the age of 8 and entered high school. I'm sorry, she began studying ballet at the age of 8. And she entered high school at the age of 12, where she joined the cheerleading team and the modern dance. So she had, you know, different talents as well. And she even auditioned at 14 for a lead role in the West Side Story. I don't know if you guys remember that. But she didn't land that role, but she did become a background dancer. So after graduating high school at the age of 16 in 1973, we were still in high school. Well, no, actually, we were in middle school,
Yeah.
which they called junior high school back then.
Right.
But she was enrolled in Stanford University, where she pursued a degree in chemical engineering.
All right.
Sister was tough. To get into Stanford, you got to be quite a brainiac. She also studied African American studies.
Wow.
So she proved that science and humanities can go hand in hand. And as a side note, I must say, I just tapped into my brother, who is Clinton Killian. He is an attorney and also attended Stanford University at the time that Mae Jemison was there. And he says she was quite a serious student, even by Stanford's standards.
Wow.
So, you had to be focused in, and for him to say that, because he was a very, smart brainiac of the family. So for him to say that, I was thoroughly impressed. She experienced racism and was the only Black, of course, in a lot of her classes. But although it was difficult to go to Stanford at 16,
wow,
she felt that her youthful arrogance may have helped her. She declared that some arrogance is necessary for women and minorities to be successful in a white male-dominated society. And some may have called her rude, prideful, snobbish, conceited, but she did not want, she did what she had to do to get to where she is today. And obviously it served her well. She graduated Stanford in 4 flat years in 1977. Sister was tough and spent the next 4 years in medical school at Cornell University in New York. She traveled to Cuba to conduct a study which was funded by the American Medical Student Association, and she traveled to Thailand, where she worked at Cambodia refugee camp. And she worked as a flying doctor stationed in East Africa.
Wow.
She joined the Peace Corps, where she said that was like the hardest thing she could have ever done, working day in and day out on research studies on chronic diseases, epidemics, rabies, and a hepatitis B vaccine.
Wow.
She even supervised pharmacy, laboratory, and medical staff, while she was doing that, writing self-care manuals and developing and implementing guidelines for health and safety issues.
Wow.
This woman is something else. She worked for the CDC, which we know all about nowadays, on various vaccines. The Peace Corps, as she said, was the hardest job she could have ever had, including being an astronaut. 24/7, 365, she was always there. So returning to the U.S. in 85, she went on to work for Cigna as a general practitioner, filling her free time with graduate level engineering courses, still studying, and then she was so inspired by the astronaut Guyon Bluford, as well as Sally Ride. So Jemison first applied to NASA, their astronaut program, in 85, but of course that was postponed because of the Challenger disaster, and I'm sure you guys remember that, where all the crew were killed, including Ronald McNair. But she was chosen when she did reapply in 87. She was chosen out of 2,000 applicants to be one of the 15 people in the NASA astronaut group, the first group selected following the destruction of the Space Shuttle Challenger. So the bright side is, in 5 years later, Jemison was on her way to space as the mission science specialist aboard Space Shuttle Endeavour.
Look at that.
So she became the first woman of color in space, breaking a barrier that she had noticed as a child in the early 1960s. So aboard Endeavour, Jemison fulfilled at least part of her childhood plan to do science in space during this 7-day space mission. So get this, I'm amazed at statistics. So Jemison logged 190 hours, 30 minutes, 23 seconds in space and orbited the Earth 127 times.
Wow.
So she made note in a video that I will share after this episode. She made note of the things that she took with her to space to make sure that everybody was represented.
Right.
And these things included a poster of Avon Ailey dancer Judith Jemison.
Right.
She also took a Bindu statue from the Women's Society of West Africa.
Okay.
She took a certificate of the Chicago public school system, promising to do well in math and science. And each of these students that promised, they got a copy of this certificate.
All right, all right.
She took up a flag, an AKA sorority flag, the oldest historically Black sorority in the U.S. Obviously, she must be an AKA. I'm assuming, I don't know. She took up an Organization of African Unity, OAU. She says, for me, it was making sure that I included others, people who would not necessarily be involved. And get this, I did not know my husband was going to be talking about Bessie, and he didn't know that, sure enough, Mae Jemison took up a photo of pioneering aviator Bessie Coleman.
Look at that.
The first African American with an international pilot license.
Right.
So after all of that, Dr. Jemison, she decided to retire from NASA in March of 1993. And her intentions was to start her own company, as well as teach, mentor, and get involved in healthcare issues, increasing her participation in science and technology. So as her legacy continues on, because Dr. Mae Jemison is still alive and still at work in the science field as a physician and a former astronaut, she was chosen as 15 candidates from, as I said, a pool of 2,000. She's also a leading voice of science, social responsibility, and education. And now she's paving the way for further human interstellar travels.
All right. Yeah.
She's a bold, brave, fearless pioneer and a sister with a wide range of learning and knowledge. And she is at the forefront of integrating the physical and the social sciences with art and culture to solve problems and foster innovation.
That's right.
So I have to wonder, so what is she doing now? She's currently leading a 100-year Starship. That's an initiative seed funded by Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, or DARPA.
Look at that.
To ensure the capabilities for human travel to another star within the next 100 years.
All right, yes.
She's also runs a Houston-based Bioscientis, which is a medical device company that she supports an international science camp called the Earth We Share, encouraging a new generation of children to pursue science. And she also founded two technology companies and the nonprofit Dorothy Jemison Foundation for Excellence. It's named after her mother, which designs and implements STEM, or science, technology, engineering, and math. She's a member of Fortune 500 company boards, the National Academy of Medicine, the National Women's Hall of Fame, and was voted as one of the 7 top women leaders in a presidential ballot poll.
All right.
And I don't know if you guys remember, but she was on Star Trek. I do not remember. I wasn't a big fan of Star Trek back in the day, but sister was on Star Trek. So she also has a dynamic background and experience as an engineer, physician, astronaut, educator, innovator, and have made her an asset for providing profound knowledge on various topics, such as sustainability, innovation, and best practices. She serves on the board of directors of Kimberly-Clark. Now, you guys know that that's a personal care corporation that produces a lot of paper products that we use today. Scholastic, you remember the book fair we used to go to, Scholastic? That's a large distributor and publisher of children's books. And she's also a part of another corporation that actually supports various medical procedures and processes through Morehouse College, the Texas Medical Center, Texas State Product Development and Small Business Incubator, all throughout Houston, Texas, bioengineering, all of that. So she has launched, this was fascinating to me. She has launched Look Up, which is an initiative that was started out to connect people from all walks of life across the world on one single day, to just look up and see the wonders in the sky.
Look at that.
And so that began in August of 2018. So I am not sure if that's still the annual date. I'm going to continue to look through the internet and see.
Okay.
But I would love to be a part of that. And she likes to hear back from people that, that looks up and see what it is that they see.
Good, right.
And what they can learn from the sky. So Dr. Mae Jemison committed her entire career and her continuation of life. She's never been married, and she continues to work in the field of science. That's her entire life history. She's changing history, and she's paving the way for others who want to make access to space and time.
That's right.
So I just want to give special recognition once again to another trailblazer, glass breaker, exceller, and innovator, a dreamer, and an achiever.
That's right.
I mean, she has a quote that I love, and I would love to share that with you right now. And it is, never be limited by other people's limited imaginations.
That's right.
If you adopt their attitudes, the possibilities won't exist because you have already shut it out. You can hear other people's wisdom, but you've got to reevaluate the world for yourself.
That's right. That's right.
For yourself. So we appreciate you listening in. We do have a challenge for you today. We are hoping that we can get some of the women to participate because this is Women's History Month. But if there is a male that emails us first, we would definitely bless you with a Cash App gift. So we'd like for you to send us an email to Sudds-R-Us@gmail.com. That's all one word. Sudds-R-Us@gmail.com. I'll put it in the comments in just a few moments. And let us know what you have gleaned from this podcast or any other podcast. The first person that emails us will receive a Cash App. So as you email us, make sure you include your Cash App handle, and we would like to bless you on this coming week. So don't forget, as a final note, to spring forward on tomorrow or tonight. Turn your clocks forward. Our time will be changing. And one last thing before we go to the scripture, we want to let you know, please tune in. Our next 2 episodes, we're expanding and we're soaring a little bit higher in this thing. We're going to have our first group of panelists on board. They're educators. We have some principals that's going to join us, and we're going to get into the topic of education and how they're, maneuvering through this virtual classroom, and as well as how they perceive the future and how they can make an impact on education. So make sure you tune in on the next 2 weeks. We're going to be having some panelists.
All right.
So lastly, despite the racism, the obstacles, the toils, the snares that were set before these queens, Bessie Coleman and Mae Jemison,
that's right,
they soared.
Yes, they did.
They surpassed, and Dr. Mae Jemison is still outclassing them today. So we close today with Psalms 23, verses 5 and 6, which is a befitting scripture for today. And it reads, "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over.
Yes.
Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." So we just pray continued blessings upon Mae Jemison.
Yes.
I mean, that is exactly what has occurred in her life. And I thank God for this opportunity to be able to share this rich history It's still Women's History Month, and we will continue to do Black history every single month. Thank you again for tuning in. God bless you. Enjoy your weekend. And send those emails. The very first one will get a Cash App gift. God bless you. Take care.
Bye-bye. Be blessed.